Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Film for Fans podcast, your home for movie news, reviews, and movie fan views, the podcast from movie fans for movie fans. I am your host, Ryan Dunlevy, joined as always by my co-host, Rob Dunham.
Wearing my Pittsburgh Steelers sad colors.
Yeah. That's too bad. Yes. Well, this is not a football podcast. This is a movie podcast, and we've got lots of movie-related topics to cover. We'll talk about the box office. We will talk a little bit about Encanto, the music from Encanto, and get into a little bit of talk about the music in Disney animated pictures. We will discuss why futuristic movies always have a dystopian worldview. And of course, our watch list. Are you ready to get started?
I am.
All right. Well, we will start with the box office results from last week. And lo and behold, The King is Dead. After a 5-week run at number one in the box office, there is a new leader. And it is Scream. That's right. Scream has been the movie to dethrone Spider-Man. 30.1 million on its opening weekend for Scream. Spider-Man down to 20.1 million. But don't feel bad for Spider-Man. It still made 668 million so far domestically. It'll be all right. Sing 2 came in at number 3 with 8 million. The 355 at 2.3 million. And The King's Man with its usual 2.2 million, where it's been for like 5 weeks now. Rob, what do you make of the new leader?
Not surprising. Like I said last week, it seems that legacy horror movies, if they're done well, tend to be like money-making machines. And Scream is no different. And I'm not surprised. When I went and saw it, it was a pretty full movie theater. I saw it on Friday.
Mm-hmm.
And the theater was probably like 95% full. So I'm not surprised. I think a lot of people went out to see it when it opened. It has been a little while since one came out, and I think people were interested in what they were going to do with it and where they were going to go with the movie. If they were going to follow the same formula as the previous movies, what they would do to differentiate it. And I'll talk more about it later, but I do think it was a quality movie and not surprised that it made the amount of money it did.
Yeah. I'm also not surprised. I mean, you can basically take horror movies to the bank. I mean, they're not going to kill the box office at the box office, but they're always going to be dependable and steady. You know, you can always rely on a horror movie to generate a decent amount of revenue and make a profit. So they're going to absolutely continue piping out horror movies, and like you said, legacy horror movies do especially well. So I am also not surprised. Plus, there hadn't been another draw movie that's come out in a while, so that also is a factor. If you've seen the main stuff that's been out in the theaters, you were probably waiting a couple weeks to get a new one in. So Scream taking the cake. Like I said earlier, it's kind of interesting that The King's Man has never had a great weekend, but it's kind of done the same thing every weekend it's been out, which is really kind of interesting. I don't know what to make of that, but we can see the total revenue in the box office obviously is not as high as it's been previous weeks, but that makes sense because it's been a while since we've had some new releases, especially multiple new releases. You got that dump right at Christmas, and then you've had nothing really since then. So it was about time we got a new movie out, and Scream takes the cake. Did I? Yeah, I went through all of them. Any other thoughts on box office results?
Not really, other than to say keep going, Spider-Man.
Yeah. It's continuing to carry on. All right. Well, we have 2 main releases coming out this week, and the first one is Redeeming Love, and this is the A story of a girl who was sold into prostitution as a child. And her name is Angel, and she knows nothing but betrayal. Can her heart ever be mended? Can it, Rob? Can her heart be mended?
I don't know. I guess we'll have to watch and find out.
Yeah, and this is based on the novel by Francine Rivers. So that's Redeeming Love. The other movie that's coming out is The King's Daughter. King Louis XIV's quest for immortality leads him to capture and steal a mermaid's life force, a move that is further complicated by his illegitimate daughter's discovery of the creature. All right, Rob. Gun to your head, man. Which one are you going to see?
Even with a gun to my head, I might say neither. I think there are still a couple other movies in the theater that I still want to go check out. So I might go do that and not watch those.
Yeah, it is interesting. Yeah, this is not my particular cup of tea when it comes to films coming out this weekend. Yeah, the whole King Louis stealing a mermaid's life force is quite the plot turn right there. Why are all French kings named Louis? Is that?
I don't know.
I don't know. Like, don't you want to change it up a little bit? I mean,
we could at least have like a Louis in there, maybe. Or
yeah,
Louise. Yeah.
I don't know. You know, there's a lot of French names. I mean, maybe use another one or two. Whatever. Yeah, so not a ton in the box office coming out. There are two movies. They are going to be in theaters this week, and maybe one of them speaks to you, and this is what you want to do. I would say I don't know. I mean, stealing a mermaid's life force probably just is too much for me. So if I had to go see one, I'd probably end up seeing Redeeming Love, but I don't know.
Yeah, they can't all be winners every week.
They can't.
Yeah.
So yes, I do not expect that either one of these movies will do supremely well. I think you're going to see figures in under 10 million for both of them. But we'll see. You never know. Maybe Francine Rivers has a big following that I am heretofore unaware of.
Yes, perhaps.
So, all right, let's move on from that. All right. In other news, I thought this was an interesting story, which should lead us to a little bit of a discussion. Encanto has a song that has made it higher on the Billboard charts than Let It Go did, which is saying something, considering every single 4-year-old girl for the last 5 years obsessively sung that song and constantly was playing on whatever device they were, somehow permitted access to. In particular, I can think of my 2.5-year-old niece who just shouts at the Google device, play Frozen. Yeah. So the song is We Don't Talk About Bruno from the film Encanto, and it became the highest let me phrase this correctly. The soundtrack tune has become the biggest musical hit on the Billboard Hot 100 chart from a Disney animated movie since 1995. And do you know which one it was in 1995?
Let's see, 95. Is it A Whole New World?
Almost. No.
Hakuna Matata.
No.
Okay, what is it?
It was Colors of the Wind from Pocahontas.
Oh, okay.
Reached number 4 in 1995.
I can't remember which one came out that year.
Yeah.
Because I think The Lion King is actually 96. I think
The Lion King was 94. And that one, Can You Feel the Love Tonight, hit number 1 in 1993. Oh, wait,
Okay.
no, that was A Whole New World, hit number one in 1993. And Elton John's Can You Feel the Love Tonight, number 4 in 1994.
Okay.
So Let It Go actually reached number 5 in April of 2014. So in the last 25 years, this is the most popular, according to the Billboard Hot 100 song from Disney, which really surprised me. I mean, I know Encanto has done quite well, but I have not heard the barrage of people singing, and there just seemed like Let It Go just had this visceral effect on everything around it. I just have not gotten that sense from the songs from Encanto. What about you?
I mean, I've seen the movie too, and I didn't feel like the music was honestly that impressive compared to some other Disney movies. And certainly I didn't think it was on the level of I didn't think We Don't Talk About Bruno was on the level of Let It Go at all. And I'm surprised it's that popular, honestly.
Yeah. 29 million streams and 8,000 downloads sold is the stats on that. I wonder if in part, I don't know exactly how the Billboard Top 100 does its rankings, but I wonder with 2014, that was like the beginning of streaming really being a more popular thing. I wonder if it was, I wonder if they weren't able to fully capture the popularity of Let It Go based on streaming, because I mean they're much better at getting data off of that now than they were in 2014. I don't know.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that's a factor.
Yeah, but it was interesting because I mean when you think of the annals of Disney history and the music and some of the music that has come out of those movies, the music itself almost has a greater legacy than some of these films do. So that kind of brings us to what I want to, discuss a little bit with you is that how big of a role do you think the music has in the success of the Disney animated movies? Is it a completely integral? Is it the most thing that's driving the success? Is it a little part? What do you think? How big of a role is the music in their popularity and success?
I don't think it's the only important thing. I think there's a lot that goes into it because I think that there is a lot of work that's been done on the animation side of things with a lot of these movies that helps make them popular. And I think they do a fantastic job of grounding themselves in whatever world it is they're trying to portray, whether it's the Middle East in Aladdin or ancient Greece in Hercules, or the French countryside, Beauty and the Beast. Obviously, the ocean with Little Mermaid. They do such a good job at, I think, putting things into settings, and then I think also marrying the music to the setting that they're in. And I think we saw that really well with Moana, if you're thinking about a recent movie, with the music that Lin-Manuel Miranda put together for that movie. It really captured the spirit of what the movie was trying to be about. I do think that music is an important part of the success of the Disney movies, because when you hear the songs, you're able to be transported kind of instantaneously to the moments surrounding the songs. But I think that the visual side of that is just as important as the music side. And that's from someone who is kind of in love with music. So I think my opinion matters on this. But I don't, because I think you need the visual element to go along with it so that there's an image in your mind of what actually is happening. Because when you think of like A Whole New World, for instance, you're picturing that magic carpet ride, or if Can You Feel the Love Tonight, you're picturing the scenes with Simba and Nala in the jungle. It's all tied together for me.
Yeah, part of it for me is I wonder if, I mean, to me, obviously, I don't think it's the main thing. I think story is still what drives it. First and foremost is the story good. Is a story worth following? Also, I think that the vocal performances from the actors are really, really important. How they can pull that off, the animation. I think, however, I wonder if the success and how good the music is plays into the long-term impact of the movie, both from a memory standpoint and the ones you want to come back to most often. I think of, when I think of Aladdin, I think of the music first and foremost. I think of, Never Had a Friend Like Me, and Robin Williams' performance as the genie when they're down there in the cave. That's the first thing I think of. I think of the music a lot when I think of Lion King. Whereas I don't when it comes to Little Mermaid. I don't at all. It wasn't one of my favorites, but I don't think of the music at all when I think of that about that movie. I don't know. It's just, I wonder if it plays a longer term role. I wonder if the success of Frozen, for instance, the longevity of the run that Frozen has had is due to the popularity of the music. So I'm wondering if that's part of the factor. The better the music, because we know how music affects the brain differently than images do. You can sing thousands of songs that you have memorized. And if you take your favorite movie, you'd probably be able to quote maybe, if you're lucky, a third of it. There's just the way music operates on your brain. So I'm wondering if it doesn't have a better long-term impact, the movies that have better music to them.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's an argument to be made for that. And it's funny that you mentioned The Little Mermaid, because when I think of that, I do think of the music.
That's interesting. That is really interesting.
Yeah. Under the Sea and I Want to Be Where the People Are. Those two songs in particular are just drilled into my memory for some reason.
Now that you tell me, I remember the Under the Sea song. I don't remember the other song.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's fascinating. Which do you have a favorite in terms of music of the Disney movies that you have seen? And you may have seen a lot more of them recently because you have kids.
Yeah,
it's been a while since I've seen a lot of these.
I really, really do like the soundtrack for Moana. I think that's up near the top of the list for me, just because I appreciate the musical style that is in that movie and the creativity involved in it.
Yeah.
And I do love the classic ones too, like Lion King and Little Mermaid, like we talked about, and Frozen. Undoubtedly, and Frozen 2 even have really good music. I actually thought the music in Frozen 2 might be better than the music in the original.
Okay.
So that's worth checking out as well. I think the Lion King soundtrack I had on repeat when that came out. So I'm a little biased to that one as well.
I would say for me, it was always Aladdin. I loved the Aladdin soundtrack. That was my favorite Disney movie growing up. It was Aladdin. So I think between Robin Williams and the music, it had a lot to do with that. Okay. Well, that's an interesting discussion. Let's move on to another discussion question. And this was something I was thinking about recently, and I thought we'd spend a couple minutes talking about it. And this is the idea that whenever this is a particularly prevalent in sci-fi, but you see this in a significant amount of futuristic movies. Almost all of them take place in a dystopian world. You can think about it from a number of levels, from the popular teen series based off of novels. You have Hunger Games. You had Divergent, some of those, to classics like Blade Runner, Mad Max, any of those type of movies. Almost all of them are in dystopian futures. So Rob, I thought we'd spend a few moments just kind of talking about why we think that is. What is the appeal of the dystopian future universe?
I think that when you look at the prospect of the future, it's hard not to imagine things being in a state of decay. And I think that people just resonate with seeing that played out in the future, whether it's catastrophic events or viral outbreak or people just bombing each other into the Stone Age,
Yeah,
or the Earth's resources being completely used up seems to be a very
yeah, that's another one.
common theme.
Yeah,
I just think it's easier for people to relate to the idea that things are going to get worse than the hope that they might get better, which is interesting because there used to be a belief like that in the age of enlightenment that men would just continue to get better and better, science would get better and better, the technology would get better and better, and the world as a whole would get better. And it seems like that is not the natural course of things. And I think people relate to seeing things completely falling apart. And that's why I think that's the main reason why dystopian future in literature and art and movies is so popular.
yeah. I think it's a fascinating concept. I wonder if, in part, I mean, I think there's definitely something about human psychology in here. I mean, there's the whole loss aversion factor where we feel losses significantly more than we feel comparison gains. There's the idea that the whole news idea of if it bleeds, it leads. The idea that our brains seem to be wired to think more towards the negative, to focus more on the negative side, to think more about the negative, even if it's not actually the way things actually are. But so I think there's part of it is human psychology that we seem to resonate more with bad news than we do about good news. I also wonder if there's an artistic element to it as well. In some ways, you have more story angles if everything is bad. If everything is bad, you have a greater sense of the heroes overcoming than if everything is good. You have more places to go. You have a different world to create. In some ways, I wonder if it's a lot easier to create storylines out of dystopia than it is to create out of the excess, which is really interesting. Think about like what with Waterworld. Let's just pull out Waterworld for another dystopian one. It's easier to sell a premise of a world without, a world completely covered in water where nobody understands land. Oh, now we've got a world, we've got a visual setup, we've got a whole thing, than it is to try and say, hey, everything's pretty good here. So I wonder if there's not an artistic element to it.
Yeah, I think in stark contrast to your Waterworld example, it's the same thing, but opposite in the Book of Eli, where they are desperate for water because there's very little around and literature.
Yeah.
So I think there's something to that where we are very short on a specific commodity that is essential for humans to survive. And what do we do with that? And then if you also, it's slightly different, but what if something that is integral to what being human is taken away? You think about a movie like Equilibrium, which would be like an extreme example of that, but like that art is outlawed basically.
Yeah.
Because it incites emotion in people, and they don't want that because they want people to not have to think about their problems basically.
Yeah. Yeah, because you kind of have the ordered movies. That's one of the ones where it's like kind of the totalitarian ordered state movies. Then you have like the complete catastrophe movies, which you can even throw Interstellar into one of those. You know, the Earth is dying, we need to find a new home. And then then you have like the whole technological chaos, the technological overthrow, with like the Matrix is even involved in that, where it's technological stuff. Blade Runner is another example, where it's a technological problem. It's really interesting, and I find it's one of those things where, getting back to the whole human psychology aspect of it, just that we, it plays on our fears. I wonder if it plays on our fears similarly to how a horror movie plays. What do you think about that idea? Because people go to see horror movies to be scared. It plays into their fears. The good ones play into things that you're already kind of afraid of. I wonder if there's an element of that in the dystopian future movies.
But I also think that people go to see it because maybe it reminds them that it's not that bad.
That's true. That's possible.
Yeah. And I think that also lines up kind of with the idea of what might make horror appealing to some people. Because you go to it and watch it and you're like, well, that's not me, at least, that kind of idea.
There's also it's kind of funny because you wonder if now I lost my train of thought on that one. What I was thinking something about the idea of it seems like in part they're almost narrative based in some cases. Like you take even one that was like Star Trek 4. Let's take this one. Now, Star Trek is actually the reverse kind of thing. Star Trek was one of the few sci-fi properties that actually went ahead and set it in a much more positive future. And that was actually intentional with Gene Roddenberry. Is like, I want to do something that's actually intentionally positive to represent humanity's progress. But even if you look at something like Star Trek 4, there's a dystopian element to it because this was in the big, like right in the middle of the whole big Save the Whales campaign. And they go over this thing where the humpback whales had died out and a probe from outer space comes in to try to find out why it lost contact with humpback whales. And they have to travel back into the past to get humpback whales and bring them back to the future. But that was pretty intentional, like, hey, here's something we want to address. So I think there's also an element to that sometimes people are trying to make the case that we need to do something with this as a result. You see this a lot in like disaster films.
Well, I think that there's always one thing that I've learned for sure about movies. There's always a message.
Yeah.
And when you're making a movie, you're trying to deliver a message. And I do agree with you that I think the message a lot of times in the dystopian end of the world movies is change what you're doing now so that we don't get to this place someday.
Yeah. And I think I'll just, we can wrap this one up, but I think elements of dystopian worlds make for very, very interesting visuals. That's another thing that really plays in. I think it's specifically like Mad Max. Like the visuals that you could create in Mad Max were spectacular as a result of that. Or a film like Oblivion has some really, really great dystopian like scenery and cityscapes. And how many movies has the Empire State Building been knocked over, blown up? Or Empire State Building, Statue of Liberty is another one where it's just like, hey, here's a cool building, let's knock it down. So yeah. Anything else on that one?
I think we're pretty good.
Yeah. All right. Let's wrap up with our watch list. These are movies we've watched over the past week, and we'll give you a little rundown on them. Rob, what'd you watch?
So I went and saw 2 movies in the theater this week, which is the first
Ooh.
time I've done that in a while.
Excellent.
Pretty happy about that. I first saw Scream. Like I mentioned earlier, I was not surprised that it did well. It's a legacy horror movie. It carries on the Scream franchise. It is the 5th in the Scream franchise, and I found it very intriguing, fascinating, and actually pretty cool how they approach that in the movie itself, because it's very self-referential. So the Scream movies are based on a movie series within the Scream universe called the Stab series. And so this one kind of talked about how that relates to what's going on in this movie, and really plays into the characters' motivations throughout the movie. Nev Campbell, Courtney Cox, David Arquette all come back in this movie to varying degrees of appearance, and actually have a role to play in the movie. So they're not just there to be there, which I was happy about. I think that it's definitely worth going to see if you're a fan of horror movies. Definitely check it out at some point if you don't go see it in the theater. I enjoyed it. I think it's a worthy installment in the franchise, and I can definitely see it being the Kickstarter of another maybe trio of movies or 4 movies or whatever it ends up being. And then I also went and saw Nightmare Alley, directed by Guillermo del Toro, one of my favorite directors. And interestingly enough, I went, having read the premise of this movie, it's Carney who hooks up with a psychiatrist, and things go a little awry. I was kind of expecting the normal Guillermo del Toro, like, mystical element to show up somewhere, and it never does. And it's really just like a character movie, like set in the early 1900s. And I will have to go ahead and say that I think Bradley Cooper might get nominated for an Oscar for this, because I think he was fantastic. This might be the best Bradley Cooper performance I've seen, and that's saying something, because he's been pretty good in some other things. Star is Born comes to mind, and several others. But this movie, he's fantastic in, and the very last scene of the movie is chilling. I'm not going to give away what happens, but the way the movie ends is just like, wow. It left me walking away thinking, wow, that guy can act.
Did you like it?
I liked it a lot.
Okay.
I liked it a lot. Obviously I'm biased because I like I said, I love Guillermo del Toro. I like how he does things.
Yeah.
But this movie really felt like in homage to like 1940s, 50s cinema, with some of the style choices and some of the editing choices.
Okay.
Just some of the transitions. There's like some pinhole transitions like that were more common in like the 50s, where the whole screen fades to black, like into the middle, and then comes back out for the next scene, stuff like that. Just some very basic choices like that. And I just think the ensemble cast as a whole did really well, and they did a really good job of bringing these worlds to life, like the carnival world to life, and the world of New York City in that time to life as well. And Willem Dafoe, as he does, just like stole every scene he was in, unsurprisingly. And Cate Blanchett was really good as a villain too. So I definitely recommend seeing the movie if you, especially if you're into drama. This was a well executed drama, in my opinion, and told a good story and had moments of intensity and is just written well. So Nightmare Alley, I recommend.
Okay. Yeah. So I watched 2 movies. I did not get to theater this week. The first one I watched was 1998's The Mask of Zorro. starring Antonio Banderas, Anthony Hopkins, and of course, Catherine Zeta-Jones. I remember liking this movie back when it came out, and seeing it in the late 90s. But it's been a long time since I've seen it. So it was interesting to go back to it now, and watching it with fresh eyes from a different perspective. I'm like, okay, this definitely had some of the late 90s movie characteristics to it. It was a long, drawn out intro to this movie. You don't really get down to the main action sequences for the first, I want to say, maybe hour of the movie. You're just waiting for what's going to happen. You've got like a little bit of action right at the beginning. Then there's the long exposition. So I thought pacing was a little bit of an issue with this movie. Another thing, there's a fine line between callbacks to other cinema or other similar type stories and just flat out ripping them off. And I think there was a little bit of I would say this crossed the line a little bit towards ripping them off, and hopefully I can remember both of them, because I'm blanking out on the second one. But one of them, there is a straight up Count of Monte Cristo moment in this. If familiar with the story of Monte Cristo, basically the one guy dies, and so the other character then switches out with the dead body so that he can escape from prison that way. Basically, they throw out a living body thinking they're throwing out a dead body. So there's that exact same scenario in The Mask of Zorro. And there's another one, and I cannot, it's blanking out. There was another one where it was basically just pulled out, like 5 minutes later, pulled out another scene, which is something straight out of a different film. So I found that, I was like, okay, I think there's a little bit of lack of creativity here. Some of the sword fighting scenes are fun and interesting. It's with the time frame, there's not a whole lot of big time stunts in this movie, which kind of surprised me, but there's a lot of sword play, which is kind of interesting. But there's one moment, I think, where the sword play just kind of breaks down a little bit. So it was not as good as I remembered it being, as it were. And that happens when films age. Some of them age better than others. So that was The Mask of Zorro. Another one I saw, which I'm not quite done with, but is Macbeth. This was the film from Apple TV Plus. That came out. It was in theaters for a little bit around Christmas, if you happen to be at the right theater. And then it came on Apple TV Plus on the streaming service on January 14th. So I got into that one. And this is a really interesting rendition. It's done by Joel Cohen. So you have the Coen brothers antics involved. Denzel Washington plays Macbeth. You have Frances McDormand in this, and it's done by A24 Studios. And I got to tell you, it was a really fascinating matchup between Denzel, Joel Cohen, and A24 Studios. I think A24 Studios has the upper hand in the look and the feel and everything about this movie. I don't know that I've seen a studio have this kind of impact on their films in this type of way, where what studio the film is coming from just by what you're seeing and what you're watching, probably since the early 2000s Lionsgate films, which is really fascinating. The look and feel of it just reminds me so much of The Green Knight. In terms of the starkness. Now the film is in black and white, and it's done in 4:3, which seems to be coming back. I'm not entirely sure why 4:3 is coming back to the degree it is, but this one's back. but it's very, very stark whites and grays. It's a very, very white and gray film. There's a lot of very white backgrounds, very gray. Of course, it uses the classic Shakespearean dialogue, and it's a really, really interesting rendition. If you're at all into Shakespeare, it's absolutely worth checking out. All right. Well, that is the show. We are done. Thank you for tuning in to Film for Fans. If you like the show, rate, subscribe, tell your friends about it, and visit filmforfans.com. I am hopefully going to be working on a new piece for filmforfans.com where I'm going to be tracing different thematic elements through 90s action movies. So I'm finally going to get around to actually writing that piece.
Nice.
So hopefully that will be up on filmforfans.com shortly. So check that out. And until next time, enjoy the movies.